Today's video is all about journaling and how it helped me to stop procrastinating, to formulate goals, and to start execute, while also feeling the process of getting there. Over the past 2 years, I've written over 200 journal entries, and I learned a lot not only about myself, but also about the art of journaling and how it can really get you ahead. In this video, I want to share the method that I've been refining over the past 2 years that I wish I had on my first entry. That way, when you start writing, you will feel the real power of journaling right from your first entry. So let's dive into it. I want to walk you through the real power of journaling and the structure to actually unlock it, how you can create a 6-month journal framework that will transform your life, how to actually feel the progress that you make every day pursuing your goal, how to write, catalog and nurture your entries for maximum impact, and what I learned throughout my latest 500 journal entries that I wished I knew from day one. So let's dive into the journal structures that I have optimized for the last 2 years. Let's go. The first thing that I would do if I were to start all over again and go back to my first entry would actually be to dedicate the first 2 pages of my journal to write down a strategic goal of something that I want to achieve within the next 6 months. So basically you write down whatever goal you want to achieve within the next time. It should be like a little bit of a bigger goal because it should be a little bit more long term. For me, I found that 6 months works really great. And then you write it down. Every 6 months you revisit that goal and see if something has changed. The reason why the goal that you're writing down at the beginning of your journal should be a little bit bigger is because you want to be actually consistently work towards the same goal over a sustained period of time. Small goals evolve very fast, but big goals should be a little bit more consistent so you can work towards it for a longer period of time. The goal that you're writing down here can be super individual, of course. So it's whatever you want to achieve within the next 6 months. And that could be, for example, losing weight or building up muscle mass, or maybe you want to get a promotion at your job, or maybe you want to quit your day job and start a side hustle. So anything that makes absolute sense for you, you can now bring to paper on your first 2 pages in your journal. So what I want you to do before writing the first word is kind of reflect of what you actually want to achieve and then bring it on paper. But before you write down your goal, make sure that it's also formulated in the right way. A good goal is always formulated very, very precisely. It is always formulated so that you can measure the success, so you should quantify it. And it's always terminated so it has a deadline to it as well. I made a quick example of how I formulate my 6-month goal and how I structure my page. When I sit down to do that, I always want to make sure that it's very, very bold and easy to find and easy to digest. So when I revisit 6 months later, that I exactly know what was going on in my mind and I don't try to overcomplicate it. And the goal that I've written down here as an example is that I want to invest into my first real estate rental property by the end of 2025. And you see that the way that this goal is formulated, it's very, very easy for me to come back 6 months later, to read it again, and to quickly say, yes, I achieved that goal, or no, I have not achieved that goal. And below that, I want to always have 2 or 3 bullet points of something that really reminds me of why I'm pursuing that goal. So maybe that is an inspirational quote or a thought that I had or something that I heard or read and really inspired me in that moment. And it's really important to kind of note that down because sometimes you tend to forget about those things and maybe you don't really remember why you started. So when you revisit this page 6 months later, it is very, very easy to exactly identify again why you started this goal in the first place. Then I think it's always kind of fun to note down how you feel in that exact moment about achieving that goal or formulating that goal. I just think it's a lot of fun that when you revisit that page after you have achieved that goal and you see how scared and uncertain you were before going on that journey, and then after you have learned all those things, you have achieved that goal, you have grown as a person, and you come back so enriched, and it's a very, very rewarding feeling. In the end, I always want to include a little section where I can envision myself throughout that journey and like set some milestones and kind of mentally prepare myself and manifest how it will feel achieving that goal. I think that always adds a little bit of creativity, energy, and motivation that always helps to kind of stay committed to that goal as well. So now that we have filled the first 2 pages of your journal, we can actually go ahead and fill the next 2 pages as well. And this is where I always put the monthly highlight collection. And that is basically just a list of every day in the month where the purpose is to write down and to capture the best moment of each day. The reason why this is very, very rewarding in the long term is because you can always revisit every month and just only read all the highlights that you had throughout that month. And that really builds a lot of gratitude, that really sharpens your memory as well, because you always recollect those memories, and really helps to see your life in a very, very positive way and to actually realize how many highlights you have throughout your life. And you should keep it very, very simple. So sometimes one word is enough, or a little sentence that just quickly recollects whatever the highlight was. And what you also will realize that when filling that list, some days might feel like there was no highlight at all. But if you keep digging a little bit, then you will always find something that was better than on other days. Maybe it was an episode on your favorite Netflix show that you really enjoyed, or maybe the book that you've ordered finally arrived, or you tried out a new lunch place and you really enjoyed it. So it can be very, very small. It doesn't always have to be a big achievement. And trust me when I say that you will be surprised how quickly this little exercise will make you see your life in a much more positive way. Now that we have written down the 6-month goal on the first 2 pages, and on page 3 and 4 we have created our highlight list that we will be filling throughout that journey, we can now start with our first daily log. And you can think about the daily log as the engine of your journey, because this is where you write down every day what you think about, what you feel, and what you have experienced. When you first start writing your daily log, it can feel very weird, clumsy, and also unusual. And that's of course perfectly normal if you have never done it before. Just remember that there is no pressure, that no one will ever read this, you will not be judged on this. Just let your thoughts flow onto paper and just start writing. Think of it like a conversation with yourself, where you organize your thoughts, maybe you clean up some emotional clutter that you have, you can name some issues that you are experiencing, maybe you can dissect some success events that you had or failure events. You can really dive in, why was it a success or what made me fail? And you can keep track, of course, of your process that you're making throughout the day. And there's of course no word count requirement or how many pages you should write each day or whatever. It's just important that you write something each day, and you will realize that at some days the words will just flow naturally, while on other days you can barely fill half a page. And that's completely fine, there's no pressure. However, what I always do every day, additionally to maybe write down what I'm going through at the moment, or like a conversation that I had, or stress that I experienced, or something that went well or something that didn't went well, I always want to make sure to include the following 3 things into my daily log. If, for example, my 6-month goal is to run 5 kilometers in under 20 minutes, I always want to include in my daily log what I achieved yesterday that got me 1 step closer to that goal, what I learned by doing that, and what I want to achieve today that will get me closer to that goal. And I call that yesterday's goal push, yesterday's insight, and today's mini goal. For example, under yesterday's goal push, I maybe want to write down something that got me closer to running 5 kilometers in under 20 minutes. And that could be anything from buying new running shoes that I actually went for a run. Maybe I watched a YouTube video about running techniques, or I only connected my tracking watch to my phone. Can be anything that just got me a little step closer to that goal that day. Under yesterday's insight, I always want to make sure that I note down something that I learned while getting closer to that goal. And for example, if the day before I was going for a run, maybe I realized on that run that when I breathe in through my nose instead of through my mouth, I have much more control over my breathing pattern and makes it easier for me to concentrate on my breathing. Then I would just make a quick note about that in my daily log. The final step under today's mini goal is of course to define a little goal that I want to achieve that will get me closer to my 6-month goal that day. And an important note is that I always try to schedule it immediately in my calendar, so I also make sure that it will be done. And the nice thing about consistently filling those 3 categories with information is that you can actually see how quickly you will make progress towards your bigger goal. The next thing that I regret not doing earlier is actually to categorize everything. Because in the end, you're writing this all down in order to revisit it as well. And it's very, very hard if you don't have a structure for that in place. So what I would really recommend you doing from day 1 is actually to start integrating a structure into your journal that makes it easier to find everything back. And what I mean by that is that you should maybe label your entries with a number. You should definitely include the date. Maybe you want to give them a title. Maybe you want to keep track of the weekdays and the page numbers and so on. And from that, create a table of content that actually makes it possible to revisit certain entries just very, very easily. What I now do with every daily log is that I give it a number, a title, and the date of the day. I also mark what weekday it was, and I give it a page number. At the end, I then make a table of content so I can always easily go back to each month and each entry and quickly find what I want to search for. And the trick here is, of course, to be as consistent as you can with your daily logs. So try really to write a daily entry and keep the structure that you created in the first place. The last thing, and that is something that I actually only learned a couple months ago, is that writing your entry only gives you access to half of the potential that a journal actually has. Because one half is of course writing it down, getting your thoughts on paper, reflecting, being able to organize your thoughts and all those kind of benefits. But the other half is about rereading your entries and actually growing and learning from that. And this is something that I learned way too late in my journey. So make sure that you also take time to revisit older entries and read them again and realize how much you have grown or how many worries you had about problems that never happened, because that really unlocks the other half of the benefit of having a journal, is to actually revisit old entries and to grow from them. A structure that I would recommend is that you first start writing your first 50 entries, and then before writing the 51st entry, you go back and read the first. And that way you always revisit what you have done before. And that structure works very well. So if you're still watching, this is basically what I would do if I were to start all over again to unlock the real potential of journaling. And trust me that this journey is really worth it, because it really makes you reflect, it makes you organize your thoughts, and it makes you see the progress that you make over time. If you want to try it out, just make sure that you write down a 6-month goal, make sure that you keep track of the highlights of your day, and be consistent with your daily logs. And then, after a couple of weeks, you will realize the potential that journaling actually has for you. If you enjoyed this video, or maybe you learned something, or maybe you got inspired or motivated, feel free to drop a comment or reach out. I would love to hear about your journal experience. But until then, see you next one.